stand before you today, the great-great-great-granddaughter of a Civil War soldier. He too sings America. In a family story that was lost from our family and the nation for some 150 years, I learned the story of Sandy Wills. Sandy was purchased on a slave auction block in Tennessee when he was a mere 10 years old. The man who bought him, Edmund Wills. He abducted my great-great-great-grandfather away from his familiar surroundings and his family, forced his last name on him, and took him to Haywood County, Tennessee, where he taught the young boy to perform all kinds of labor, anxious for him to become a man so he could produce more slaves for the plantation. But when my great-great-great-grandfather became a man, instead he plotted his escape. In 1863, he heard about the formation of the United States Colored Troops, and he had the historic opportunity to fight for his freedom. Grandpa was 23 years old, and he rounded up 5 of his young slave brothers, Mac Wills, James Wills, Andy Wills, Dick Wills, and Richard Wills. And one by one, they fled Edmund Wills's plantation in a death march for freedom. They too sing America. It was a long walk to the 4th Heavy Field Artillery, and they had to cross state lines to get into Kentucky. And there was a death warrant on their heads. The bloodthirsty Confederate soldiers were under strict orders to kill any slave even suspected of going to fight. The Wills brothers were not deterred. They joined some 200,000 other black men to fight for their freedom. They too sing America. Most were illiterate. They didn't know their own birthdays. Slavery in its contemptible arrangement had erased the need for mothers and fathers and celebrations. They had wretched lives where no one even cared to keep a record of when they were born or when they died. But still, my great-great-great-grandfather put on a soldier's uniform and enlisted October 13th, 1863. You should have a handout in your chair, and I'd like to show you what I saw that blew my mind a year and a half ago. On the first page is the enlistment form of my great-great-great-grandfather when he walked presumably barefoot to the enlistment station. And that's the reason, my friends, I'm not wearing any shoes on the cover of that limited edition of my book, Die Free. I'm not wearing shoes because I know Sandy didn't wear any shoes when he walked to fight for even my freedom. And this is an excerpt from chapter 2 of my book, and you can read along with me on that enlistment page as I interpret what you're looking at on that first page. When Sandy faced his enlistment officer, he stated his age as 23 and said he was born in Tipton County. Assumedly, without even raising his head to look at my great-great-great-grandfather, the lieutenant wrote BLK for black, for complexion, eyes, hair color as well. And when it came to occupation, the lieutenant wrote farmer. Farmer? Now there are 2 schools of thought here. Either Sandy told Lieutenant Moggy that he was a slave and the officer wrote farmer, which is unlikely, or my great-great-great-grandpa looked that man in his eyes and said, "Sir, I'm a farmer." And if he did, My great-great-great-grandpa was more of a revolutionary than I could have ever possibly imagined. Because on all of the other enlistment forms of those soldiers, for occupation, they wrote slave. Occupation, slave. Which was very disturbing to read. But if my grandpa wrote farmer or said farmer, then no matter how many people claimed to own him, he knew, an illiterate man who was born into slavery knew that he could not be bought. Apparently, he believed in his own freedom before he was legally free. Yeah, the world looked upon him as a lowly slave, but that's not what Sandy saw in himself. He understood exactly what the abolitionist Frederick Douglass meant when Frederick Douglass said, "Gentlemen, the iron gate of our prison stands half open. Who would be free themselves must strike the blow. Better even die free than to live slave."